Hello friends and welcome back to House of Props. Today I'm going to show you how I made this Cirith Ungol Uruk-Hai Shield completely out of EVA foam. It features some of the texturing on the surface similar to what we did with the Berserker sword, and the back also features these adjustable straps. So without any more introduction, let's get started. This is the action figure that inspired this project. On the side over here you can see the shield with the Eye of Sauron in red, and since I've made a few pieces with the Hand of Saruman, I'm going to keep the eye on the final design, but you could easily swap it out for a white hand if you wished. I always begin by drafting out the design and patterns on some paper before I begin with foam. And this time I had a helper. This is Samantha, and usually she'll leave me alone when I work, but this time she wanted to get in on the action. After I managed to get the pattern laid out, I cut parts A and B out of some 20mm foam that I made by gluing sheets of 10mm foam floor mats together. There are some seams, but those will be invisible in the final build. The edges that will be the center seam get a 20-degree bevel on the underside, that way when the pieces go together they point out. And along these beveled edges I apply a layer of contact cement. To help speed up the process, I use a heat gun to help dry out the contact cement to the point where I can attach the pieces together. While I do that, I would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and if you click the notification bell you will get notifications when new projects are released. Thank you! And when the contact cement is ready, the two pieces can be pressed firmly together. This will give the shield its outward curve shape. Then part C can be glued onto the top of the piece with the curve cut out of it, aka part A. If there is any extra that sticks off the end, you can slice this off with a hobby knife after it's attached. Then part D can be attached to the top of part B in the exact same way. You'll notice that I have a little bit of a gap happening. This is because I sliced my angle wrong, but the correct angles are included in the template. Next, I'm going to bevel the sides of the shield. To do this, I'm using a meat slicer and just cutting a little off of the outer edges. This will make the shield look more authentic and not so thick and clunky. Next, I took part E and beveled the edges. Part of part E has an overhang. This is indicated with the dashed lines in the template. This overhang attaches to the bottom of the shield in the corners like this. Next, I take my Dremel with a sanding drum and lightly sand down the knife edges. This just makes the edges not look so intentional as if cut by a knife. Then, using the same tip, I carve some battle damage into the surface. To get an angled line, angle the tip of the Dremel so just the edge of the sanding drum is carving into the foam. You can also use the tool to add damage around the edges. This breaks up the line of the outer edge and gives the shield more character. Next, I add on the part F pieces. 2 of these are attached to each bottom spike, and 3 are placed about a third down from the top of the shield. The edges of these can be rounded with the Dremel. The pieces of part G can be attached to the back of the shield where your arm will be about center on the shield. And then I did a test fit to see where I wanted to connect the two G pieces to each other. I then marked this with a ballpoint so I could align and glue with contact cement. And after attaching the two H pieces to the shield where they would cross over my forearm, I repeated the same process of marking with a ballpoint pen to glue them to each other. Then I glued some 4mm foam rivets onto the handles with CA glue, and each arrow shape gets 3. Then the part eyes can be glued on top where the pieces cross like this. I'm using CA glue for this because it just works better when working with small pieces, that way you don't have to deal with contact cement and it gets all messy. Then I just roughed up the edges and the surface with a Dremel so they will look like metal when I'm finished. Next, I heat sealed the entire shield. To do this, I'm using a heat gun, and the heat gun will make any little foam fuzzy bits shrink away. With dark colored foams like this, you can see how the surface changes color slightly when it seals as I waft the heat gun over the surface. To make the handles look like leather, I heat them up with the heat gun and take a balled up piece of aluminum foil and press this into the warm surface. This will give a dimpled effect that will look like worn leather. Next, I'm going to apply a texture to the surface. Usually for something like this I would use quick seal, but for this much surface area it would get expensive. So I'm using a latex caulk. There is more in a tube and it costs less. To apply the texture, I smear the caulk unevenly on the surface with a palette knife, making sure to fill in seams and gaps as I go. Then I take a soft bristle brush and pounce the caulk so that it breaks up the smear marks and leaves a bumpy surface. Then using the same brush on its side, I lightly flatten the bumps by pulling the brush to the side. This, when painted, will give a rough metal looking surface just like in the film. I even apply the same texture treatment to the back of the shield as well to get an all-over effect. This caulk, when it dries, turns clear, and when it is completely dry, I will spray the entire shield with Plasti Dip. This project will get 2 coats, both front and back, to make sure all the texture is evenly coated. After the Plasti is dry, I base the metal surface with some charcoal gray. You want to make sure you press the paint into all the surface textures so that there isn't any Plasti Dip showing through. While the gray dries, I base the leather straps with some yellow ochre. Yes, this is very bright and yellow, but it works great as a base color when painting leather, and when we're finished, you won't know it started out so yellow. When the gray is dry, I take some metallic tin and dry brush this across the metal surface. It doesn't have to be evenly coated, the metallic will give the paint job a metal looking finish in the end. While the tin dries, I thin some burnt umber with water and brush this onto the yellow looking leather straps. Then I take a paper towel and lightly dab the wet paint. This leaves a dimpled texture behind and enhances the dimple effect that we got with the aluminum foil. When the tin is dry, I take a black wash and brush this onto the surface of the shield and pounce the surface with a paper towel, similarly to what we just did with the leather. This wash will tone down the tin so it isn't so bright looking and make the surface look like steel when it dries. The same wash and technique can be applied around the edges of the leather straps as well. This will make the leather look heavily used and stained. Once the black wash is dry, a burnt umber wash can be brushed into spots on the surface. This will begin to age the steel and make the shield look like it's one of the ones in the film. While the burnt umber wash is drying, I thinned some raw sienna and applied this in around the rivets and battle damage to make the metal look like it's beginning to rust in spots. After cutting the stencil out, I place it on the shield so that the 3 rivets are just under the top of the paper. Be sure to keep this piece when cutting the stencil out because you will need it here. For the eye, I'm using some crimson red. I pounce this onto the stencil, trying to keep my brush as vertical as possible. This will help prevent the bristles from sliding under the stencil edges too much. I wasn't worried about an even paint job. In fact, I wanted it kind of blotchy. Then the stencil can be peeled off before the paint completely dries. Then I take my brush and pounce some of the edges of the eye. This will make it look more hand painted and not so clean and crisp. And with that, the Uruk shield is completely finished. We got to see the Uruks again in the Return of the King when Frodo gets stung by Shelob and the Uruks take him off to Cirith Ungol. There was that whole skirmish between the Orcs and the Uruk-Hai. I wanted to have another project that tied into my Uruk builds, and with the 20th anniversary coming up of the Return of the King, it felt right to pull something from Cirith Ungol for that. I hope you enjoyed this build. If you did and you would like to make one of these shields for yourself, you can find a link in the below description to the free template, and please, while you're at it, check out my other Uruk builds and Lord of the Ring themed builds. Again, I hope you enjoyed this build. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, subscribe to House of Props, and I'll catch you on the next one. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at House of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.